I stepped in to save my ex's company for my kids, yet I was mocked while he took credit, until the separation did not happen with shouting or broken furniture. It ended quietly, the way exhaustion ends a long argument. Papers were signed, boxes were packed, and life moved into two smaller versions of what it used to be. She did not feel free or angry. Mostly, she felt tired. Tired in a way that sleep did not fix. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. From the first day after the separation, her focus became narrow and sharp. Stability. That was the word she repeated in her head when everything else felt uncertain. Not happiness. Not pride. Stability. A roof that would not disappear. Food that would always be there. School fees paid on time. Doctor visits without fear of the bill at the end. She woke up early every morning, long before the house came alive. The silence felt safer than the daytime noise. She made lunches, checked homework, and planned the week in her head while the kettle boiled. Her children did not see the weight she carried. She made sure of that. They still laughed. They still argued over small things. Their world stayed mostly normal, and that was her quiet victory. What she did not expect was how quickly her ex's business would start to fall apart. At first, it came as rumors. A late payment here. A supplier pulling back there. She heard it through small comments, half sentences, and people speaking carefully around her, as if the truth might hurt more if said out loud. She did not ask questions right away. She listened. She always listened. The company had once been solid. Not glamorous, but steady. It paid bills, funded holidays, and covered emergencies without panic. During the marriage, she had been involved more than anyone realized. She handled numbers, schedules, and small decisions that kept things running smoothly. She never demanded credit. It never mattered to her then. After the separation, that balance disappeared. Her ex made fast decisions without planning. Loans were taken without proper thought. Good employees left quietly. Bills stacked up faster than expected. The business did not collapse all at once. It weakened slowly, like a structure losing support beam by beam. She tried not to care. She told herself it was no longer her responsibility. She had enough on her plate. Single parenting was not gentle. It did not pause for bad days. There were lunches to pack, shoes to replace, school forms to sign, and questions she did not always know how to answer. But then she started doing the math. If the company failed, the damage would not stay contained. It would ripple outward. Child support would become uncertain. Health coverage tied to the business would disappear. Tuition payments would turn into questions instead of facts. Every safety net connected to that company would tear at the same time. Her children would feel it first. That was the moment she stopped pretending she could look away. She did not announce anything. She did not confront anyone. She did not demand meetings or apologies. She simply opened her old laptop one night after the children were asleep. The screen glowed softly in the darkroom. For a moment, she just stared at it, hands resting on the keyboard, breathing slowly. She knew the numbers. She knew the systems. She knew where the leaks usually started. The first thing she did was review old contacts. Former clients. Suppliers who still respected her voice even if they no longer spoke openly. She sent short, careful messages. No explanations. No emotions. Just quiet check-ins. Then she reviewed public records and financial statements she still had access to. The situation was worse than she expected. Debt was growing faster than revenue. Decisions were being made without understanding long-term impact. Someone was steering without looking ahead. Her chest tightened, not with anger, but with urgency. She made a choice that night without saying it out loud. She would help. Not because she owed her ex anything. Not because she wanted recognition. But because every failure of that company would land on her children's shoulders eventually. And she would not allow that. She began quietly fixing what she could from the outside. She advised a former manager without revealing her role. She corrected accounting errors that no one had noticed yet. She connected the company to a short-term solution that prevented an immediate shutdown. Each step was small, invisible, designed not to attract attention. She did this while maintaining her own life. Work during the day, parenting in the evenings, repairs at night when the house finally slept. Some nights she barely slept at all. She told herself it was temporary, just until things stabilized. No one thanked her. No one even knew. That was fine. She was not doing this to be seen. Some days were harder than others. There were moments she felt foolish, stepping in to save something that had once caused her pain. There were nights she stared at the ceiling wondering why responsibility always found her, even when she tried to walk away. But then morning came. A child asked for help with homework. Another complained about a missing sock. Life moved forward, as it always did. And she reminded herself why she had chosen this path. She was not rescuing a business. She was protecting a future. Slowly, the company stopped bleeding. Payments were delayed but not missed. Suppliers softened their tone. Crisis turned into tension, and tension turned into something manageable. From the outside, it looked like luck. A sudden improvement no one could explain. Her ex accepted the change without question. He took credit without knowing it. He spoke confidently again. She heard this through others and felt nothing. No pride. No bitterness. Just relief. She stayed in the background. Every fix she made was designed to disappear once it worked. No trail. No proof. Just stability restored quietly, like tightening loose bolts before a bridge collapses. At home, her children remained unaware. Their lives stayed whole. School continued. Doctor appointments happened without fear. There was food on the table and calm in the evenings. She watched them closely during those weeks, noticing small things. How easily they relaxed. How safe they felt. That safety was fragile, she knew. And she would protect it, no matter the cost. Somewhere deep inside, she understood this sacrifice would not be rewarded. People rarely notice what does not break. But she was not waiting for gratitude. She was choosing prevention over praise. As the weeks passed, exhaustion settled into her bones. She moved through days on routine and habit. But every time she considered stepping away, something stopped her. One more loose end. One more risk. She told herself she would stop soon. She did not yet realize how deeply involved she had become, or how this quiet sacrifice would eventually be misunderstood. For now, the business stood, and her children were safe. That was enough. For the moment. Once she made the decision to step in, there was no turning back. What started as a few late nights quickly became a second, hidden life. During the day, she showed up where she was expected. She worked, smiled when required, and answered questions from her children with steady calm. At night, she became someone else entirely. Quiet. Focused. Invisible. She knew exactly what the company needed because she had once been part of its backbone. Not the loud part. Not the part that shook hands and posed for photos. The part that read contracts carefully. The part that noticed patterns before they became problems. The part that fixed small errors before they turned into disasters. The first real challenge was the creditors. They were tired. Tired of excuses. Tired of missed calls and half-promises. Their voices carried frustration sharpened by doubt. When she reached out, she did not introduce herself with titles or history. She spoke calmly, directly, and with respect. She acknowledged mistakes without assigning blame. She asked for time, not forgiveness. Some hung up. Some laughed. But some listened. Those were enough. She built payment plans that made sense instead of sounding hopeful. She cut unnecessary costs that had been ignored because pride refused to admit waste. She suggested small operational changes that improved cash flow within weeks, not months. Nothing flashy. Just smart, steady corrections. When she used her own savings, she did it carefully. Never in large amounts that would draw attention. Just enough to plug holes until real solutions took hold. She told herself it was temporary. A bridge, not a destination. Still, there were moments her hands shook when she transferred money she had planned to use for emergencies. She hated dipping into it. That fund represented safety, control, independence. But every time she hesitated, the image of her children's faces returned. School hallways, doctor waiting rooms, quiet nights at home. She pressed send. The company did not transform overnight. Recovery never looks dramatic from the inside. It feels slow and uncertain. Some days nothing seemed to improve. Other days brought new problems she had not anticipated. But gradually, the panic eased. Invoices stopped piling up. Phones rang less aggressively. Employees began to breathe again. She noticed the shift through small signs. A warehouse worker staying late without being asked. An office assistant joking again in messages. People stopped whispering about layoffs. They started talking about next month instead of next week. None of them knew why. She preferred it that way. She corrected mistakes that were not hers. Signed off on fixes she would never be credited for. Cleaned up decisions made without foresight. There was no satisfaction in it. Only responsibility. She had learned long ago that fixing something does not mean owning it. There were moments bitterness tried to creep in. Late nights when exhaustion stripped away her patience. When she thought about how easily others took credit for stability they did not create. When she remembered how invisible she had always been, even before the separation. She pushed those thoughts aside. This was not about fairness. It was about outcome. Her ex grew more confident as the company stabilized. His tone changed. His posture did too. She heard about it through shared circles. How he spoke of hard work. How he framed recovery as resilience. How he never mentioned help because he truly believed none existed. She did not correct the story. Recognition felt unnecessary, even dangerous. Visibility could invite questions. Questions could reveal involvement. And involvement could turn quiet protection into open conflict. She was not interested in being pulled back into battles she had already survived. She stayed careful. Emails were sent from generic accounts. Advice passed through intermediaries. Money moved in ways that left no trail pointing back to her. She erased herself from every solution as soon as it worked. At home, life stayed steady. She continued routines with almost stubborn dedication. Homework checks. Packed lunches. Conversations about ordinary things. She laughed when appropriate. She listened when needed. Her children felt no shift in her attention, even though her energy was stretched thin. Some nights, after they were asleep, she sat alone in the dark. The weight of what she was doing pressed down harder then. Not because it was difficult, but because it was lonely. No one to share the burden. No one to acknowledge the cost. She reminded herself that loneliness was familiar. She had survived it before. As months passed, the company crossed from survival into recovery. Numbers stabilized. Plans extended further into the future. People spoke about growth instead of collapse. The fear that once hovered over the workplace slowly faded. Employees felt it most. They walked differently. Spoke with relief. Some mentioned how lucky they were that things had turned around. Others joked about how close they had come to losing everything. None of them questioned why the turnaround felt so smooth. She watched all of it from a distance. There was a strange peace in invisibility. No pressure to perform. No need to explain. No expectations placed on her beyond what she already carried. She controlled the narrative by refusing to enter it. Still, the cost was real. Her savings shrank. Her sleep suffered. Her body carried tension she rarely acknowledged. But every morning she woke up knowing her children's lives remained untouched by the chaos she was quietly containing. That knowledge steadied her. There were moments she wondered what would happen if the truth ever surfaced. If people knew who had really kept the company afloat. If the story would change, or if it would simply find a new way to erase her. She did not dwell on it. Believing recognition did not matter became easier the longer she stayed unseen. Safety mattered. Stability mattered. Everything else was noise. By the time the company was clearly on solid ground again, she had already begun stepping back. One responsibility at a time. One connection released. One quiet withdrawal after another. She left no instructions. No reminders. No warnings. If the company survived without her, that meant she had done her job correctly. At home, her children laughed freely, unaware of how close their world had come to changing. She watched them with a calm that felt earned through sacrifice rather than luck. She told herself she was done. That this chapter was closing. What she did not yet understand was that saving something quietly does not always end the story. Sometimes, it only delays the moment when the truth demands to be seen. The first sign came quietly, the way most changes do. A casual comment from someone she hadn't spoken to in months. A message passed along without much thought. A tone that felt different, heavier with certainty. "He really turned things around," someone said, almost admiringly. She paused when she heard it. Not because the words were new, but because of how confidently they were spoken. As if the struggle had been simple. As if the recovery had been obvious. As if one person alone had carried the weight. She said nothing. At first, she told herself it didn't matter. She had expected this. When something works, people look for a visible face to attach it to. They want a story that fits neatly. One hero. One decision. One moment of strength. Quiet work rarely fits that shape. As profits returned, the company began to breathe more easily. Meetings felt lighter. Future plans were spoken aloud without hesitation. There were smiles where tension once lived. And with that comfort came storytelling. Her ex stepped into it naturally. He spoke with confidence that had been missing months before. He talked about pressure and perseverance. About leadership and belief. About how close everything had come to falling apart, and how he had refused to let that happen. People listened. Family members repeated his words at gatherings. Employees nodded along in meetings. Even those who had once worried quietly now spoke with pride about how strong the turnaround had been. She watched all of it from the edge. At first, she was simply not mentioned. That was easy enough to accept. She had chosen invisibility. She had built it carefully. But as time passed, the silence around her role became something else entirely. It wasn't just absence. It was erasure. Stories were retold with details smoothed over. Decisions she had guided were reframed as moments of personal insight. Corrections she had quietly made became examples of bold leadership. Her fingerprints were wiped clean from every success. She noticed how easily it happened. People prefer simple explanations. They do not look for hidden hands. They applaud what they can see. Still, something inside her shifted. It was not jealousy. Not anger. It was a quiet, unfamiliar ache. The feeling of standing behind glass while watching a version of events that no longer included her at all. At home, the change reached her in smaller, more personal ways. Her children mentioned things they heard in passing. Comments from relatives. Praise repeated without thought. Stories about how strong their other parent had been. How impressive the recovery was. How lucky everyone was that he had stepped up. She listened carefully. She did not correct them. She did not interrupt. She smiled when expected and asked gentle questions to keep the conversation moving. Her children spoke without realizing what each word pressed against inside her. She reminded herself why she had stayed silent. Protection had always come before recognition. But silence feels different when it becomes permanent. The shift grew clearer over time. Invitations arrived that did not include her input. Decisions were made without consulting her, even indirectly. Her quiet channels closed one by one as people assumed they were no longer needed. The company did not need saving anymore. And so, in their eyes, neither did she. She felt it most when gratitude vanished completely. Not just public thanks, but the private acknowledgement that once existed in small ways. A careful tone. A hesitant respect. Those disappeared too. In their place was confidence. Confidence built on a story that no longer made room for her. She watched as her ex's image grew stronger. More polished. More certain. He spoke as if the struggle had shaped him alone. As if resilience had come naturally, without help, without correction, without unseen sacrifice. And people believed it. Because belief is easier than questioning success. There were moments she wondered if she should speak up. If she should quietly remind someone of the truth. Not to claim credit, but to stop the lie from settling too deeply. Each time, she chose silence. Speaking would change everything. It would open doors she had carefully closed. It would turn quiet protection into visible conflict. And conflict would ripple outward, touching the one place she had sworn to shield. Her children. So she stayed quiet. But silence has a cost. Late at night, she replayed conversations in her head. Moments when she could have said something small. Something neutral. Something honest. She wondered if choosing invisibility had slowly trained everyone to forget her entirely. Not just her role. Her value. She pushed that thought away when it came. She reminded herself that this had never been about praise. She had never needed applause. She had needed stability. Safety. A future untouched by collapse. And she had achieved that. Still, something felt unsettled. The story being told was growing stronger every day. And the longer it lived without correction, the harder it would be to change. She began to realize that staying invisible did not freeze the narrative. It allowed others to write it. At home, her children remained safe. Their routines unchanged. Their laughter easy. She watched them carefully, searching for signs that the shifting story might affect them. They trusted what they heard. Why wouldn't they? She told herself the truth would not matter if their lives stayed whole. But deep down, she felt the ground shifting beneath her. Not in the company. In how she was seen. And how easily her sacrifice had been rewritten as someone else's strength. She did not yet know what that would mean for her future. Only that something important had been taken without anyone realizing it. And once a story takes hold, it rarely lets go on its own. At first, the comments were easy to miss. They slipped into conversations quietly, disguised as humor or casual remarks. Someone laughed a little too loudly when her name came up. Someone else shrugged and said they had heard a different version. Nothing direct. Nothing sharp enough to confront. She noticed anyway. Whispers have a sound to them. They linger longer than spoken words. They change the air in a room. What began as silence slowly turned into something colder. People started joking. Light jokes, they told themselves. The kind meant to entertain, not harm. Someone said she liked to feel important. Someone else suggested she remembered things differently now that the company was doing well. A comment about how stress can make people imagine their role was bigger than it really was. She heard these things secondhand at first. Then closer. Then not hidden at all. She did not argue. She did not correct anyone. She listened with the same calm she had practiced for years. The calm that protected her children. The calm that kept situations from escalating. The calm that asked her to swallow discomfort and keep moving. Some people implied she was exaggerating her involvement. That she had maybe helped once or twice, but nothing significant. That her memories were colored by resentment. That she was struggling to let go. Others were harsher. They said she was bitter. They said she wanted attention. They said she could not stand seeing her ex succeed. Each word landed quietly but stayed. She reminded herself that these people did not know the truth. And because they did not know it, their opinions should not matter. That was what she told herself, over and over, like a rule she had memorized. But rules are easier to follow when they are not tested. The hardest moments came at home. Her children began repeating things they heard without understanding them. Not to hurt her. Never to hurt her. Children repeat what sounds confident. What sounds certain. What adults say as if it is fact. One afternoon, a comment slipped out during a normal conversation. Casual. Unthinking. Something about how she probably remembered things differently. Something about how people talk when they feel left out. She felt it like a sharp inhale. She kept her face steady. She asked a gentle question instead of reacting. Where did you hear that? Who said it? The answers came easily, without fear. Family members. Friends. Conversations she had not been part of. She realized then how far the story had traveled. Her children did not know they were repeating a version of events that erased her. They did not see the nights she had stayed awake. The savings she had drained. The pressure she had carried alone. To them, it was just noise from adults who sounded sure of themselves. She told them nothing. She did not defend herself. She did not correct the narrative. She hugged them instead. Asked about their day. Helped with homework. Maintained the routines that kept their world steady. Inside, something tightened. Silence became heavier than before. It was no longer just about staying unseen. It was about being misseen. She noticed how people looked at her differently now. With curiosity. With doubt. With a hint of amusement. As if she were a story that had already been decided. There were moments she wanted to speak. Moments when the truth pressed against her chest, demanding space. Moments when she imagined laying everything out calmly. Dates. Numbers. Decisions. Proof. Each time, she stopped herself. Truth shouted too early often sounds like desperation. She believed that if she stayed quiet long enough, facts would matter more than jokes. That real results would eventually reveal what words could not. That time had a way of correcting lies. So she endured. She endured comments that reduced her effort to imagination. She endured laughter that disguised dismissal. She endured being talked over, talked around, talked about. She endured for her children. At night, when the house was quiet, the weight felt heavier. She replayed her silence and wondered if it was strength or fear. She questioned whether protecting peace now would cost her something later. But every morning, she chose the same path. She showed up calmly. She stayed steady. She trusted that truth did not need shouting. Even as the noise grew louder. Even as mockery replaced gratitude. Even as the story drifted further from reality. She held on to the belief that facts would outlast rumors. That integrity would matter eventually. That one day, being quiet would not mean being erased. For now, she remained silent. Not because she was weak. But because she believed the truth deserved patience. The moment did not arrive with drama or raised voices. It came quietly, dressed as confidence, wrapped in applause. The gathering was meant to celebrate progress. A room filled with familiar faces, polite laughter, and the comfortable mood that follows survival. People spoke easily now. The fear that once sat in every conversation had faded into memory. She stood near the edge of the room, not hiding, just not central. She had learned where she fit in these spaces. Observing. Listening. Existing without expectation. Her ex moved through the crowd with ease. He smiled often. He spoke loudly enough to be heard without trying. This was his moment, and he knew it. When he finally spoke to the room, attention shifted naturally toward him. Glasses were raised. Heads turned. The silence that followed was respectful, expectant. He began telling the story. Not the complicated version. Not the fragile one. The clean version. He talked about pressure and resolve. About long nights and tough calls. About standing alone when things were falling apart. He described a moment when he decided to take full control, to trust himself, to push forward when others doubted. People nodded. Someone clapped. He continued, growing more confident with each sentence. The language became stronger. The story tighter. He spoke as if the turnaround had been inevitable because of him. Then he said it. A comment meant to sound casual, almost playful. Something about how even those who claimed credit later had not been there when it mattered. Something about how stories change when people feel left behind. A light laugh followed. A few others joined in. The room did not fall silent. It laughed. She felt the shift immediately. Not in the room, but inside herself. A tightening that had been building for months finally reached its limit. This was not silence anymore. This was permission. She looked around. At faces she recognized. At people who had once been unsure, who had once whispered fears about losing everything. At people who now smiled comfortably, accepting a version of events that erased her completely. She realized something then. By staying quiet, she had not protected the truth. She had allowed it to be replaced. The comment lingered longer than the laughter. It settled into the space between words. It painted her not just as invisible, but as dishonest. As someone reaching for relevance. As someone who deserved dismissal. She thought about her children. She thought about what they had been hearing. What they were absorbing. How easily they repeated what sounded confident. How silence looked like agreement to a young mind. She imagined them growing up believing that effort only mattered if it was seen. That staying quiet meant being wrong. That letting someone else take credit was the same as being weak. That thought hurt more than any joke ever could. She understood then that silence had stopped being protection. It had become a lesson. And it was the wrong one. She did not stand up immediately. She did not interrupt. She let the moment finish. Applause followed. More smiles. The room moved on as if nothing important had happened. Inside, everything shifted. She felt a calm settle over her, different from the calm she had practiced for years. This one did not ask her to shrink. It did not ask her to endure. It asked her to decide. She excused herself early. At home that night, the house felt unusually quiet. Her children moved through their routines without noticing the change in her. They talked about ordinary things. School. Friends. Plans. She listened more closely than usual. When one of them repeated something they had heard earlier, a familiar comment wrapped in humor, she did not smile this time. She did not react sharply either. She sat down. She asked them to sit with her. Her voice stayed steady, but honest. She did not accuse. She did not list sacrifices. She did not attack their other parent. She spoke about truth and effort. About how sometimes the most important work is done quietly, and how silence does not always mean agreement. They listened. Not perfectly. Not fully. But enough. She realized she owed them more than protection from conflict. She owed them clarity. That night, she did not sleep much. Not from anxiety, but from planning. She reviewed timelines, decisions, communications. Not to build a case for revenge, but to ground herself in reality. She needed to know her truth clearly before she shared any part of it. For the first time since the separation, she allowed herself to imagine speaking openly. Not emotionally. Not defensively. Simply factually. She understood now that truth does not always rise on its own. Sometimes, it needs permission. And sometimes, that permission has to come from the person who has been quiet the longest. She did not know how or when she would speak. She only knew she would not continue disappearing. Not for applause. Not for recognition. But because teaching her children to stay silent in the face of lies was a cost she was no longer willing to pay. The breaking point did not look like anger. It looked like resolve. And once it arrived, there was no going back. She did not rush the moment. Days passed after the gathering, quiet and ordinary on the surface. School mornings continued. Meals were cooked. Conversations stayed light. But beneath it all, she was preparing. Not for confrontation. For clarity. She gathered what she already knew existed. Emails saved carefully over time. Messages that showed advice given when no one else had answers. Documents that traced decisions back to her hands. Timelines that made sense of moments others remembered only as luck. She did not add commentary. She did not decorate the truth with emotion. She let facts stand on their own. When the opportunity came, it was not dramatic. Another meeting. Another gathering meant to discuss next steps and future plans. Familiar faces. Familiar confidence. She took a seat like everyone else. When the conversation turned toward growth and praise, she waited. When the same story began to surface again, she waited a little longer. And then, calmly, she spoke. Her voice did not rise. She did not accuse. She simply asked for a moment. The room quieted out of habit rather than interest. People expected a brief comment. Maybe gratitude. Maybe agreement. Instead, she began with dates. Not opinions. Dates. She spoke about the first missed payment. The week the accounts nearly froze. The night when the risk of closure became real. She spoke slowly, clearly, as if reading from a record rather than memory. Then she shared emails. Printed. Organized. Easy to follow. Messages asking for guidance. Responses she had written. Suggestions that were followed weeks later and praised as leadership. Corrections that prevented losses before they appeared publicly. She moved carefully through the timeline. Not once did she raise her voice. Not once did she look toward her ex. She spoke to the room. People leaned forward without realizing it. Brows furrowed. Pens stopped moving. The confidence that had filled the space earlier began to thin. She showed where funds had come from when there were no other options. Small transfers. Temporary support. Enough to keep things alive while solutions were put in place. She explained restructuring steps. Quiet changes. Adjustments that no one noticed because they worked. There was no anger in her tone. Only precision. The room shifted. People began connecting dots they had ignored. Comments made months earlier suddenly aligned. Decisions once credited to intuition now had context. What had felt like a smooth recovery now revealed its hidden scaffolding. Silence settled differently this time. It was not respectful. It was uncomfortable. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else avoided eye contact. The certainty that had once filled the room retreated, replaced by unease. She finished without flourish. She did not say what she deserved. She did not demand acknowledgement. She simply ended with one sentence. These are the facts. Nothing more. The room stayed quiet. Her ex did not respond right away. Not because he was angry. Because he was exposed. He shifted in his seat. Opened his mouth once. Then closed it. The confidence he usually carried did not disappear loudly. It faded. His explanations, when they came, were vague. General. Disconnected from the details she had just presented. He spoke about teamwork. About shared effort. About difficult times bringing out different strengths. But the story no longer held. It was missing something now. Credibility. No one argued with her. No one applauded either. This was not a moment for applause. It was a moment for reckoning. She felt it then. Not satisfaction. Not relief. Something quieter. Alignment. Her words matched reality again. She looked around the room. Some faces held regret. Others confusion. A few held understanding that had arrived too late to be graceful. She did not stay long after that. There was nothing else to say. At home, that evening felt different. Lighter. Not because the truth had been praised, but because it had been spoken. Her children noticed the shift without knowing why. The air felt calmer. Their conversations easier. They did not ask questions. They did not need explanations. She slept deeply for the first time in months. The truth had not caused chaos. It had restored balance. And though she did not know what would come next, she knew one thing with certainty. She had stopped disappearing. And once the truth is spoken calmly, it has a way of standing on its own. The reaction did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments, scattered across days and conversations, quiet moments that revealed more than public statements ever could. Some people approached her privately. Not immediately. Not confidently. They waited until the room felt less exposed, until there were fewer witnesses. Their apologies were soft and brief. A lowered voice. A short sentence. An acknowledgement without excuses. I didn't know. I should have asked. I'm sorry. She accepted each one without drama. She did not press for explanations. She did not seek reassurance. She listened, nodded, and moved on. Apologies were not the point. Awareness was. Others said nothing at all. They avoided eye contact. Conversations ended early. Invitations softened or disappeared. People who had once spoken freely around her now measured their words. The confidence they had worn so comfortably no longer fit. She noticed it, but she did not react. Truth has a way of rearranging rooms without asking permission. At home, the change reached her more gently. Her children grew quieter in a thoughtful way. They asked fewer casual questions and listened more closely when she spoke. One evening, a simple comment turned into a longer pause. Then a question. Did you really do all of that? She answered honestly, but simply. She did not list sacrifices. She did not describe exhaustion. She told them what she did and why she did it. Because they mattered. Because stability mattered. Because sometimes love looks like effort no one sees. They understood more than she expected. Children notice patterns long before they understand stories. They remembered moments that made sense now. Late nights. Quiet mornings. Her constant steadiness during uncertain times. The pieces began to align. Their respect did not arrive loudly. It arrived quietly. In how they listened. In how they stopped repeating borrowed opinions. In how they looked at her differently. That was enough. The ex felt the shift too. He spoke less. When he did, his words carried less certainty. The story he once told so confidently now hesitated at the edges. He no longer controlled how events were remembered. Others filled in gaps he once shaped himself. He did not confront her. He did not apologize either. He simply lost control of the narrative he had enjoyed. And without that control, his confidence faded into something quieter, less assured. She did not celebrate. There was no satisfaction in watching someone shrink. No relief in seeing discomfort spread. She did not feel victorious. She felt settled. Standing firm did not require dominance. It required clarity. She had spoken the truth once, calmly and fully. She did not repeat it. She did not defend it. It stood on its own. In meetings, she spoke only when needed. At gatherings, she remained composed. She did not reclaim attention or redirect praise. She simply existed without apology. People adjusted around her. That was their work, not hers. At home, the atmosphere shifted into something steadier. Conversations felt lighter again, not because things were forgotten, but because they were understood. Her children no longer questioned her place in the story. They saw her clearly now. And that clarity mattered more than public acknowledgement ever could. She realized something important during that time. Standing up for the truth did not change who she was. It revealed who she had been all along. Quiet, capable, steady. She did not need applause. She did not need validation. She needed alignment between reality and story. And now, finally, she had it. Time moved forward, as it always does. The business continued. Meetings were held. Plans were made. Numbers rose and fell in the normal rhythm of work. From the outside, it looked like a success story that had found its footing. But that was never the real ending. For her, the true resolution happened in quieter spaces. In evenings at home. In small conversations. In the way her children watched her now, with understanding instead of confusion. They no longer measured strength by volume. They no longer believed that the loudest voice carried the most truth. They had seen what endurance looked like without performance. What responsibility looked like without recognition. They learned that sacrifice does not always arrive with applause. Sometimes it arrives with exhaustion. With silence. With choosing what is right even when no one is watching. And they learned that strength can be calm. That it can sit quietly in a room and still hold its ground. For her, the lesson was just as important. She had spent so long believing that protecting others required disappearing herself. That keeping peace meant staying small. That love was measured by how much of herself she was willing to erase. She understood now how wrong that belief had been. Protection does not require self-erasure. Care does not demand silence. And truth does not weaken relationships that are meant to last. She did not become louder. She did not become harder. She simply became clearer. Clear about what she would accept. Clear about what she would no longer carry alone. Clear about the example she wanted her children to learn from. The past did not change. The nights she stayed awake still happened. The sacrifices were still real. But they no longer defined her as someone unseen. They defined her as someone steady. As someone who knew when to give. And when to speak. The business survived. But the real victory was personal. It lived in the way she stood now, without apology, without explanation, without needing approval. It lived in the understanding shared between her and her children. It lived in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing the truth and refusing to abandon it. She did not regret saving what was once broken. But she no longer believed that saving others required losing herself. The story did not end with celebration. It ended with clarity. And the lesson remained, simple and unshakable. Sometimes the strongest move isn't saving what's broken, but refusing to let the truth be buried.